Hi class, and welcome to your first video for Honors Biology. In this video, I will talk about the different things that contribute to life in the study of biology. However, while you are watching this video, you need to take notes. So write down as much as I say. Don't just write what is on your screen, but there's also important things that I say that are not on the screen. If a picture or a diagram seems somewhat important, you will want to screenshot that and put that in your notes later, or attempt to draw it, depending on what you are more comfortable with. When I check your notes, I will check for the fact that you have all the correct notes and that you have pictures and diagrams that are important to the unit or chapter. So let's begin. What is life? Well, biology is the ongoing study of life, and biology is the study of life. So we have different forms of biology. We have microbiology, which is on a small level. It's like your bacteria, very small cells, viruses. Since we're studying living things, we're also going to study the characteristics of living things. Because in order to be alive, you must have all of the characteristics of a living thing. So the first one is order. All living things have order to them, and they usually start at the atom level. You can even start before the atom level at the subatomic level and put those together to make everything. So we have atom, molecule, organelle, cell, tissue, organ, system, and organism. How this goes is as we put multiples of that level together, we get to the next level. Reproduction. Organisms reproduce their own kind, so they have to be able to mate and reproduce in order to be considered living. So something like a mule, which is a donkey and a horse that have mated, cannot reproduce. So because of this, it is not considered a species. It is living, and we'll talk about this more in the year and more in class as to why this may be living, but other things are not. Growth and development. They have to be able to grow and develop. You are currently developing into your adult body, but you are also growing. And growing doesn't just mean growing tall. It can be growing new cells. All organisms have the ability to grow and develop. So it could just be that your mom or dad, who have grown and developed into their adult body, now are just replacing cells, and those cells are developing into mature cells. So there's all kinds of things we can do with growth and development. It doesn't mean we stop the minute we get into our adult body. So energy processing. Being able to convert energy from something that has been eaten for the organism's own resources, whatever you had for lunch or dinner, taking that food and taking out the good vitamins and nutrients. So your protein, your carbohydrates, your lipids, your vitamin A, C, D, calcium, all of these things we need to continue life, we are able to take out. Response to the environment. All organisms need to respond to a stimuli, an event that will evoke a certain reaction from an organism. Now, not everyone will have the same reaction to a certain stimulus. If I throw a baseball at someone's head who plays baseball, your thought probably is that they will catch it. But if I throw a baseball at someone's head who plays the violin, their first instinct may not be to catch it, but maybe to duck. So we have a certain reaction still, but that reaction is changed based on our experiences. Regulation. Many types of mechanisms regulate an organism's internal environment, keeping it within limits to sustain life. So we have this picture of the lemur here, and the lemur is sitting out in the sun because it's trying to regulate its body temperature. So while we regulate our body temperature through our nervous system, other organisms who are cold-blooded must regulate it through external factors. So knowing how to regulate is still a type of regulation. Evolutionary adaptation. Adaptations evolve over many generations as individuals with traits best suited for the environment have greater reproductive success and pass on their traits to their offspring. So if you take a look at this picture, this is a katydid. A katydid looks almost exactly like a leaf, and it can be camouflaged very easily in the summer and spring and sometimes even the fall months, so that predators are not going to eat them. So this adaptation is helping them to survive, and if they survive, they should be able to reproduce. Okay, so now that you heard what different characteristics there are, we want to talk about life's hierarchy. So biological organization unfolds as the following. We have the biosphere, the ecosystem, the community, population, organism. And at each of these levels, starting at biosphere is the entire Earth. And at each of these levels, we get smaller and smaller and smaller until we get to the organism, which is one individual living thing. But we can go even smaller. Remember how we talked about order with the characteristics of life? Well, this is just getting into that order. And that order for an individual starts with the organ system and then still goes lower and lower. And we get to the organ. Finally, at the very end, we get to molecules and atoms. The next part of life that we're going to study are cells. Cells are the first level of living things on the hierarchy of life. So before that, the atoms, the organelles, any of that is not alive because it does not contain all the characteristics of a living thing. So all organisms are composed of cells. They can be a single cell or multicellular. And there are two main types, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And we'll get into this more during the year, but a prokaryote basically does not have membrane-bound organelles, whereas eukaryotes do. So let's talk about the different types of biology a little bit. So there's something called systems biology, which is the goal is to construct models for dynamic behavior of the entire system based on studying the interactions among parts. So what kind of does this mean? So we can look at small level biological systems and we can develop big scale to look at how they are working together, and we can look at those functions from the biggest, the biosphere, the entire Earth, all the way to the smallest of the molecules and how they work together. So by developing these models, we can then look at this system. Okay, so we're always exchanging matter and energy comes from two things. We have our plants that are producers, they provide food and oxygen. Animals are consumers using the food plants provide, but also the oxygen, and they replace it with carbon dioxide for the plants who need that again to produce. We're going to look at the next part, which is evolution, which is our core theory of biology. So in evolution, we look at DNA, and DNA is what makes up our genes. A lot of us think solely about evolution and how evolution is natural selection through survival of the fittest, but we actually look more at DNA, and the DNA encodes a cell's information and is similar to how we arrange words in the alphabet. So having those differences in the DNA provides the differences in you, me, everyone that is part of the human species, and even other species. That DNA is what provides the difference. The next is we believe life has three domains, and in those three domains we have archaea and bacteria, which are both bacteria, but the archaea are older and they live in extreme environments. The bacteria, used to be called eubacteria, is prokaryotic organisms still. They are bacteria, but they're newer and they have shapes. And then we have eukarya, which is all eukaryotic cells. and it's what you think of most of the time. So plants, animals, anything along those lines is going to fall into eukarya. So evolution explained by the diversity of life. The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, which I talked about. Darwin and natural selection articulated two main points. The first was a large amount of evidence to support the theory of evolution, and second, he proposed the mechanism by which this occurred, natural selection. So this is not the only way that we see diversity of life, but it is one of the ways. Lastly, we want to look at scientific inquiry. This is something scientists use to look at their experiments and explain what has happened through their experiment. So the first thing we need to know is, what is the data? Well, we have two forms of data in science. We have quantitative, anything dealing with a numerical measurement, or qualitative, dealing with descriptive measurements. So an example of quantitative data would be like an amount of time, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, a length, 2 meters, 3 meters, anything like that would be a quantitative data. But qualitative data is dealing with description, so it might be colors, scents, things that you can't really give a number to. So by doing this, we collect and analyze the data, and they lead to conclusions using the type of logic called inductive reasoning. So you think about what you initially researched and what you meant by doing this experiment, and then you come up with a reason for why this happened. So this is what we use for the scientific inquiry. The first thing we're going to do is ask a question or have a problem, and we're going to do some research in order to answer that question. The reason we do research now is because we want to construct a hypothesis, but a hypothesis, as you've probably been told before, is an educated guess. Well, you cannot make an educated guess without doing any kind of research. So we answer our question through our hypothesis, and then we conduct our experiment. So we've really thought about the problem and why this occurs. The next thing we do is we analyze the results and we draw a conclusion. And when you analyze your results, you're looking at graphs and tables of your results, and you're coming up with a reasoning behind it. Now, all hypotheses should be testable, and you should have a clear conclusion with any experiment. So this is the end of our notes for chapter 1. Now, what I want you to do is not only to have great notes in some of these figures. You don't really need the pictures that went along with the characteristics of life, but this figure right here that you are looking at is very important. Make sure you understand it. So if you need to, go back and re-listen to it. You don't have to take notes that time, but just listen. And lastly, come in class prepared to talk about this. We're going to talk about it when you get back to class, and we're going to review it with everyone in the class so we know that everyone understands this topic.